Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of sources, research, and notes, and really try to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge to get you truly well informed.
And today we're diving into something, well, quite extraordinary.
We really are. We're plunging headfirst into what can only be described as a political earthquake, shaking one of the world's major democracies, the United Kingdom. Just 1 year after what seemed like a pretty decisive general election, the UK political scene finds itself in, an astonishing state of turmoil.
It's really something. The polls are telling this incredible story. Established parties, the big names are struggling.
And this new player, well, relatively new on this scale, Reform UK, is on a truly unprecedented ascendancy. It's quite remarkable.
It really is more than just a typical political shift. It's genuinely fascinating, and I think potentially a seismic realignment in British politics.
Seismic is the word.
When you consider the speed of this change, the dramatic pivot in public sentiment in just 12 months, it's unlike anything we've really observed in recent memory for a major Western democracy like the UK.
So this isn't just about who's up and who's down in the weekly polls.
No, not at all. This feels much deeper. It's about a profound reordering, potentially, of political allegiances, priorities. It could fundamentally redefine the UK's identity, maybe for decades to come.
And just to really set the stage for how dramatic this is, let's quickly cast our minds back. July 2024, Labour Party achieves a landslide victory. Huge win.
A massive win. It looks like a very clear mandate, didn't it? A fresh start after, quite a few years of conservative rule.
It certainly seemed that way at the time. A sea of red on the electoral map.
Exactly. That map was painted red, a staggering majority for Labour. Yet, fast forward just 12 months, here we are, July 2025, and the UK finds itself in this incredibly volatile state.
So that overwhelming mandate, it feels like ancient history almost.
It really does. Despite that seemingly clear victory, the political ground has shifted with, astonishing speed. That initial landslide feels very distant now.
So here's where the data gets really compelling, doesn't it? Revealing the core of this transformation. We're seeing recent polls, and these aren't just simple polls. We're talking sophisticated YouGov, more in common MRP polls.
Yes, the MRPs are key here.
They're showing not just, bit of a dip for the ruling Labour government, but a truly meteoric, almost unbelievable rise for Reform UK.
And what's crucial to understand here and why these MRP polls are so significant is what that MRP actually means. It's multi-level regression and post-stratification.
Right, which sounds technical, but what does it allow them to do differently?
Well, unlike traditional national polls that just ask, who would you vote for, MRP models dig into vast amounts of data demographics, past voting behavior, specific local constituency information, loads of it.
What's up more detailed?
Much more granular. It allows them to create these seat-by-seat predictions across all 650 parliamentary constituencies. They can spot these nuanced regional shifts, voter movements, things a simple national average would completely miss.
And what are these detailed models showing about reform?
The sheer scale of the projected shift is the headline. These MRP polls suggest Reform UK isn't just gaining a few points here and there. They're showing Reform potentially becoming the largest single party in the House of Commons.
The largest party, from where they were a year ago.
Exactly. Or at the very least, holding the crucial balance of power in what we call a hung parliament, where no one party has overall control.
That rapid transformation from a Labour landslide to this kind of fragmented picture in just 1 year. It's just staggering.
It really is. And it's a powerful indicator, I think, of profound and, frankly, widespread public dissatisfaction. Something isn't working for a lot of people.
Now, you might be listening, perhaps outside the UK, and thinking, okay, interesting, but why should I really care about British domestic politics? Well, the UK isn't just any country, is it?
No, far from it. It's a G7 economy, still a major global player. It's a nuclear power, a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Its internal stability, or indeed its instability, creates these palpable ripples across the globe.
So connect the dots for us. How does internal UK politics impact the wider world?
Well, when we connect this to the bigger picture, the UK's internal political dynamics have significant external implications. They directly influence geopolitics, global economics, the whole web of international relations.
So a policy shift in London isn't just felt in London.
Absolutely not. A shift in the UK's domestic policy, especially on things like trade agreements, security alliances like NATO, or its approach to global challenges climate change, for instance, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It reverberates. It impacts supply chains, diplomatic alliances, even the stability of international institutions.
Absolutely. This isn't just a British story unfolding over there. It feels like a living case study in democratic volatility, doesn't it?
It really does. It offers a powerful example of how quickly the political ground can shift, challenging these long-held assumptions we have about stability, even in established democracies.
It's like a microcosm of this global search for new political answers in what feels like an increasingly turbulent world.
And it prompts a critical question, I think, for all democracies. What does this tell us about the resilience of traditional party systems when they're faced with this kind of widespread voter disillusionment? The UK, with its deep-rooted democratic traditions, a history often defined by a stable two-party system, is now giving us this very real-time, high-stakes example of these pressures.
So the lessons learned here could be relevant elsewhere.
Highly relevant, I'd say. The speed of political fragmentation, the emergence of populist alternatives, other nations facing similar societal and economic stresses will be watching this very closely.
So what does this all mean for you listening in? In this deep dive, we're going to really try and decode this rapid, truly unprecedented shift in UK politics.
We'll explore its underlying causes, dig into the reasons behind Reform UK's meteoric rise,
and understand its potential multifaceted impact on Britain itself, its economy, and its crucial place on the global stage.
Our aim today is for you to gain a much clearer understanding of this rapidly evolving situation and its profound implications, both nationally and globally.
Okay, let's begin by unpacking this current UK political landscape. Let's focus first on the challenges faced by the Labour government. 1 year on from that huge victory in July 2024, it certainly hasn't been smooth sailing, has it?
No, you're absolutely right. Their journey has been anything but smooth. Labour inherited some incredibly tough economic headwinds from the previous Conservative government. Really tough.
Can you spell those out? What exactly did they inherit?
Well, we're talking about a period marked by persistently low economic growth. The UK was often lagging behind its G7 peers. On top of that, an extraordinarily high national debt. It's now over 100% of GDP. And significant fiscal constraints. These aren't just abstract numbers on a page. They translate directly into really difficult choices about public spending, about what you can and can't do.
So those big promises Labour made during the election campaign.
They've been severely hampered by this stark economic reality. It's made it incredibly challenging to fund new initiatives, the things they wanted to do in areas like the National Health Service or education. They've found themselves governing with their hands tied, essentially, by a treasury that has very little room to maneuver.
And for the average person across the UK, how do these economic realities hit home? We hear about the cost of living crisis still rumbling on.
Yes, and it manifests as a very palpable crisis. We're still seeing persistent, elevated inflation, even if it's maybe easing slightly from its absolute peaks, and high interest rates. Those continue to impact citizens directly.
How so? What's the direct impact?
They hit very hard. Persistent inflation means your wages just don't stretch as far. The purchasing power is constantly eroded. Everyday necessities, groceries, fuel, energy, they're significantly more expensive.
People really feel that week to week.
Absolutely. The price of a typical basket of goods has jumped by double-digit percentages in recent years. That's a burden felt acutely by low and middle-income families. And at the same time, high interest rates, which the Bank of England uses to try and fight inflation,
Right.
they've dramatically increased mortgage payments for millions of homeowners. People are seeing their monthly housing costs jump by hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds when their fixed-rate deals end.
That's huge pressure.
It creates immense financial stress. It fuels this pervasive sense of insecurity across the population, this feeling like you're constantly falling behind, no matter who's actually in power.
And in response to these immense pressures, there's been, a perception, hasn't there, of policy U-turns or perhaps just a lack of decisive, impactful action in critical areas.
Yes, that perception is definitely out there. Take welfare reform, for example. Labour came to power with a mandate for change, but the sheer scale of the economic challenges seems to have forced a more cautious approach.
So promises dialed back.
Well, there have been criticisms that their plans for significant reforms to the social security system have either been watered down or delayed, basically due to these fiscal realities. It's a similar story, arguably, with the National Health Service.
Which is always such a huge issue in the UK.
Always. Labour campaigned heavily on reducing waiting lists, improving services, but the sheer magnitude of the crisis, millions of people still waiting for appointments for procedures, has meant that visible, tangible improvements have been slow to materialize.
And public expectation was high after that landslide, wasn't it?
Very high. People expected quick, impactful change. When those changes don't appear quickly, or if promises seem to be walked back, even if there are legitimate economic reasons behind it, disillusionment sets in really fast.
It breeds that sense that the government isn't really in control, perhaps, or just isn't delivering.
Exactly. It creates this feeling that they aren't delivering on their promises, which erodes trust.
So, despite all the initial hopes, the euphoria that accompanied Labor's victory in 2024, that public disillusionment hasn't just festered, it seems to have deepened.
Yes, and that creates incredibly fertile ground for alternative voices or parties promising something different.
And while Labor grapples with the challenges of governing, the Conservative Party, the previous ruling party, they're not exactly having a resurgence, are they?
Oh, far from it. The Conservative Party's decline post-2024 election has been continuous, profound, and really quite remarkable for a party that dominated British politics for so long.
How bad is it looking for them in the polls?
In recent polls, they are often slipping not just to third place behind Labour and Reform UK, but sometimes even fourth place, perhaps behind the Liberal Democrats in certain areas.
Fourth place? That's almost unthinkable historically.
It's an unprecedented position for one of the UK's two historically dominant parties. They're struggling immensely to regain any public support or even articulate a compelling vision that resonates with voters anymore.
What's behind that struggle? Is it just the hangover from defeat?
It's partly that, but also their internal divisions, which were so public in the years leading up to 2024, the rapid turnover of prime ministers, the policy chaos. They still seem to be plaguing them. They appear exhausted, frankly, lacking clear leadership, unable to escape the shadow of their recent past.
So a sense that they don't know how to reconnect.
Yes, there's a pervasive feeling that they simply don't know how to reconnect with an electorate that has largely abandoned them.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you look at both Labour, the current government grappling with huge problems, and the Conservatives, the previous government, still in disarray. You see this pervasive sentiment across the UK.
Yes, widespread public dissatisfaction.
And it's not just targeted at one party. It feels like a much broader malaise, a dissatisfaction with the mainstream political parties in general.
That's what genuinely stands out here. This isn't just a typical cyclical swing, from blue to red or red to blue, which has historically been the norm in British politics.
It feels different this time.
Much deeper, I think. It feels like a fundamental rejection of the traditional political offering. We're witnessing, I believe, a breakdown of the old class-based voting patterns that define British politics for generations.
So voters aren't just swapping between the big two.
No, they're not simply swapping allegiances within that established framework.
Right.
They're expressing this deep-seated yearning for fundamental change. They feel unheard, unrepresented, increasingly alienated by political elites, perhaps.
But that creates a vacuum.
A significant vacuum, and parties outside the traditional duopoly, like Reform UK, are eagerly, and you have to say, very effectively, stepping in to fill it. It's a search for authenticity, maybe, for direct solutions in a political landscape that many perceive as overly bureaucratic and just out of touch.
And that perfectly brings us to this unstoppable rise, it seems, of Reform UK. For our listeners who might be less familiar with this rapidly ascending force, where exactly did they come from? What are their origins?
Well, Reform UK has its immediate roots in the Brexit Party. And the Brexit Party itself emerged from that profound dissatisfaction with the established political order, didn't it? Particularly around the handling of the 2016 Brexit referendum and how it was implemented afterward.
Right, that feeling of betrayal among Leave voters.
Precisely. The Brexit Party, founded by Nigel Farage, successfully channeled that public anger over perceived betrayals of the referendum result. Now, it has since rebranded and evolved into Reform UK, but its central figure, Nigel Farage, has remained absolutely pivotal.
He's still the key figure then.
Oh, absolutely. His presence is intrinsically linked to the party's identity, its messaging, its ability to capture media attention and galvanize a specific segment of the electorate. He is, without doubt, the singular driving force behind Reform UK's current trajectory. He's built this political brand over decades that resonates deeply with a particular strain of British populism.
Let's talk policies then, because that's where their appeal really crystallizes for many voters, isn't it? You mentioned immigration as their central, most resonant theme. Can you expand on the specifics there? What are they proposing?
Yes, immigration is, well, it's unequivocally their flagship policy. It's the issue they believe defines them and resonates most deeply with the public, or at least a large segment of it.
And the specifics.
Their platform explicitly focuses on stopping illegal crossings, particularly those highly visible small boat crossings in the English Channel. They frame these as a symbol of broken borders, of government incompetence.
And they advocate for strong action.
Immediate and decisive action, yes. Often suggesting methods that, frankly, would be highly controversial under international law. Beyond that, they propose an immediate freeze on what they term non-essential immigration, aiming for a net zero migration target overall.
And why does this resonate so strongly, do you think?
What's crucial to understand is that it taps into these widespread public concerns, genuine concerns for many, about border control, national sovereignty, the perceived strain on public services like housing and healthcare, and also fears about cultural change.
A feeling that other parties haven't addressed this.
Exactly. A significant segment of the British public feels that successive governments, both Conservative and Labour, have failed to adequately address these issues. So Reform's uncompromising stance seems like a refreshing, perhaps decisive, alternative to them. For many, it's not just about the numbers, it's about a sense of national control and identity.
Okay, and moving to the economy. They've articulated some very distinct stances there too, particularly their criticism of net zero policies. What's their core economic argument?
Yes, their economic stance is largely characterized by this profound skepticism towards policies aimed at achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Reform UK argues these policies impose an immense, unnecessary financial burden on businesses, on households, stifling economic growth, making the UK uncompetitive.
So they see green policies as a drag on the economy.
Essentially, yes. They often point to the high cost of renewable energy projects or mandated green technologies as examples. Instead, they push strongly for radical deregulation across various sectors. They believe removing red tape, government intervention, will unleash private enterprise and economic dynamism.
And taxes.
They advocate for significant lower taxes across the board for individuals and corporations. The argument is this will stimulate investment and consumption. Now, the specific details of their tax plans can sometimes be a bit sparse,
Right.
but the overarching message is clear. Less government, lower taxes, a more competitive free market environment.
And what about energy specifically?
Crucially, they emphasize robust support for North Sea oil and gas extraction. They see it as vital for the UK's energy independence and economic prosperity, which directly contrasts with environmental policies and signals a desire to prioritize domestic energy production over climate targets.
And how do they propose to manage the national debt with lower taxes?
Well, they also talk about significant cuts to public spending and the civil service to reduce the national debt, framing it as necessary fiscal discipline, though the exact sums often remain debated.
So it's not just about specific policies then. It seems like a broader stance against the status quo, against established institutions. They really embrace that anti-establishment rhetoric, don't they?
Yes, that's absolutely a core tenet of their identity and their appeal. They frequently criticize what they pejoratively call the blob.
The blob.
Yes, it's their term for the vast, often unseen bureaucracy, established institutional powers, and what they consider to be an out-of-touch political and administrative elite. It targets government departments, academic institutions, parts of the civil service, even NGOs they believe hinder progress or resist fundamental change.
So they're positioning themselves as outsiders.
Exactly. They fundamentally challenge traditional political norms and conventions, often positioning themselves as courageous outsiders, speaking uncomfortable truths to power. This narrative strongly appeals to a significant segment of the electorate who feel alienated from mainstream politics, who believe the system is rigged against them, or that traditional politicians are beholden to vested interests, not the ordinary citizen. It's a powerful tool for galvanizing distrust.
And that leads directly into their self-positioning as speaking for the ordinary person, framing their whole approach as just common sense.
Precisely. They consciously cultivate this image of being practical, pragmatic, unburdened by what they view as political correctness, complex ideologies, or the abstract theories you might hear in Westminster.
So, simple solutions to complex problems.
That's the appeal. This common sense approach is designed to connect directly with the everyday concerns of average citizens, offering seemingly straightforward, often blunt solutions. Their immigration policy, for instance, is framed as simply controlling our borders, presented as inherently rational, obvious.
And that cuts through the noise.
It can be incredibly appealing in times of uncertainty and disillusionment, where voters feel tired of perceived political equivocation and jargon from established parties. It fosters a feeling that Reform UK is speaking directly to their lived experience, articulating frustrations that others seem to be ignoring.
Okay, so with all that in mind, the disillusionment, the clear platform, the anti-establishment vibe, what are the main reasons for Reform UK's truly astonishing surge in the polls? It's been so rapid.
Well, the primary reason, as we've touched on, is that profound and widespread disillusionment. Reform UK is successfully capturing votes from both traditional Conservative and Labour voters.
From both sides, how does that work?
Well, these are individuals who feel profoundly unheard, deeply let down, maybe even betrayed by the established parties. For many ex-Conservative voters, Reform is seen as the natural home for those who believe the Tories have fundamentally abandoned Conservative principles, especially on immigration or fiscal discipline. They feel the Conservatives didn't deliver a proper Brexit, perhaps.
And for Labour voters defecting.
On the other hand, you have a significant number of working-class Labour voters, especially in traditionally Labour areas, who feel their concerns about immigration, cultural identity, the cost of living, have been ignored by a party they perceive as increasingly out of touch, maybe too focused on urban or metropolitan priorities.
So Reform offers a vehicle for that frustration.
Exactly. A fresh vehicle for their frustration, a voice that seems to genuinely echo their concerns with unapologetic clarity. They are, in many ways, a protest vehicle for a deeply frustrated electorate.
And you mentioned Nigel Farage earlier. His personal charisma and that pervasive media presence must be a huge factor too. He's quite the showman, isn't he?
He is, undeniably, a master of political communication, a unique figure in British politics. He's a strong leadership figure with an almost unparalleled ability to command media attention and communicate directly with the public, often bypassing traditional media filters.
How does he manage that?
His charisma, his populist rhetoric, his constant presence across various media platforms, mainstream news, social media, his own shows ensures Reform UK's message is constantly amplified, reaching a vast audience.
Yeah.
He embodies the anti-establishment sentiment.
Cultivating that man of the people image.
Precisely, the man who dares to say what others only think. This strong personal brand gives the party a recognizable, often provocative face. For disillusioned voters seeking a decisive leader who doesn't mince words, who appears to speak from genuine conviction, Farage's authentic, if sometimes abrasive, style is a powerful magnet. He's less a traditional politician, more a media phenomenon, really, leveraging that to huge political advantage.
And beyond the leader himself, their messaging seems incredibly effective. It's not just clear, it's remarkably direct, isn't it?
Absolutely. Their success lies in the power of simple, direct messages. While other parties might offer these nuanced, multifaceted policy proposals, often weighed down by caveats and compromises.
Reform cuts through.
They cut straight to the core issues that resonate most powerfully with their target audience, especially immigration and national sovereignty. Their rhetoric is unambiguous, easily digestible, often delivered in this punchy, almost slogan-like manner.
Like stop the boats.
Exactly. Stop the boats isn't just a policy proposal. It's a powerful, easily understood statement of intent. This clarity provides a sense of certainty and purpose that appeals deeply to voters tired of perceived political equivocation, endless debates, complex solutions that seem to deliver little tangible change.
So in a confusing world, directness appeals.
In a crowded and often confusing information landscape, Reform's directness provides a compelling, straightforward alternative. It really does.
They also seem remarkably adept at capitalizing on ongoing crises. It feels like every new problem, every negative headline just fuels their narrative.
They're absolute masters of this. Reform UK expertly exploits public frustration over a whole range of ongoing, highly visible issues. The persistent economic woes, inflation, cost of living create this constant source of public anxiety and anger.
And the NHS.
Add to that the significant NHS waiting lists. That's a crisis that impacts nearly every household in some way, creating personal distress, a feeling of systemic failure. And then, of course, the persistent, highly visible immigration issues, especially the channel crossings, which dominate headlines and fuel widespread public anger.
These aren't abstract problems for people.
No, they are daily realities for millions of Britons. They generate this deep well of frustration. Reform UK frames itself as the only party willing to truly address them head-on, often with these direct, uncompromising solutions, contrasting sharply with what they portray as the indecision or incompetence of the mainstream parties.
So they become the voice of the aggrieved.
Effectively, yes. They channel that public anger very effectively into electoral support.
And finally, tying this all together, it feels like this entire surge links back profoundly to the Brexit legacy, doesn't it? That lingering feeling, perhaps, that Brexit hasn't quite delivered or hasn't been fully implemented.
You've hit on a really critical point there. The Brexit referendum in 2016 unleashed this powerful set of political and cultural forces, and a significant number of voters, particularly those who strongly supported leaving the EU, feel that Brexit hasn't delivered on its promises.
Or hasn't been done properly.
Or that it hasn't been implemented in its purest form, as they might see it. They often point to continued regulatory alignment in some areas, trade friction, or the ongoing issue of illegal immigration as evidence that the benefits of sovereignty have been squandered or diluted by subsequent governments.
And reform steps into that space.
Squarely into that void. Reform UK offers a more uncompromised, or what they would call it, true Brexit vision. They appeal directly to those who feel the job was left incomplete, promising to finish Brexit, reclaim full national sovereignty.
So they harness that unresolved sentiment.
Yes, it allows them to harness a powerful, unresolved sentiment among a core segment of the electorate. It makes them the standard bearer for those who still believe in the transformative potential of a truly independent Britain, free from what they perceive as external constraints or interference. It's a powerful emotional connection to a still unsettled political identity. Hashtag the fragmentation of British politics and governance implications.
Okay, so this rapid rise, this fracturing of support, it brings us to a really profound question about the very fabric of British politics. Are we actually witnessing the effective end of the traditional two-party system? That would be truly seismic.
When we connect this to the bigger picture, the evidence is, well, it's compelling that we are indeed seeing a significant erosion of that traditional two-party dominance, the system that's defined British politics for over a century.
What's the evidence? What do the numbers show?
Recent MRP polls consistently show the combined Labour and Conservative vote share at historic lows, often struggling to get much above 60–70% in projected national vote. That's a stark contrast to historical norms, where they regularly commanded, over 90% between them.
So this isn't just a temporary blip.
It doesn't feel like it. It indicates, I think, a fundamental structural shift away from the traditional duopoly. Voters are increasingly willing to look beyond the two major parties. They're spreading their support among smaller, often more ideologically focused, Alternatives Reform UK, the Liberal Democrats, regional parties like the SNP in Scotland.
It suggests voter loyalty isn't what it was.
Not at all. This volatility suggests a much more fractured political landscape where voter loyalty is no longer a given. The old party alignments seem to be breaking down. We could be entering an era where coalition governments or minority governments become the norm, rather than the exception.
And what does that actually mean for the outcome of the next general election? Because if no single party gets a clear majority, that throws the whole system into disarray, doesn't it?
Precisely. Current projections, based on these evolving polling trends, and especially those MRP models, suggest a high likelihood of no single party achieving a clear overall majority in the next election.
A hung parliament.
Exactly, a hung parliament. And in such a scenario, no one party has enough seats in the House of Commons to form a government on their own. They have to seek alliances with other parties to form a coalition, or perhaps attempt to govern as a minority government, which is incredibly difficult.
So it complicates everything right from day one after the election.
Dramatically. It complicates the process of forming a stable administration and, crucially, makes passing legislation much, much harder. The UK's political system, the whole Westminster model, is typically geared towards strong single-party majorities. A hung parliament introduces a period of considerable uncertainty and intense negotiation immediately following an election.
So, in that kind of fragmented landscape, what are the potential coalition scenarios people are talking about? The idea of a reform conservative coalition keeps coming up. It sounds quite intriguing, maybe counterintuitive for some traditional Tories.
It is indeed a fascinating, albeit pretty contentious, possibility that's being widely discussed, certainly in Westminster circles. The real possibility of such a coalition exists, particularly if their combined vote share and seat count are strong enough to keep Labour out of power. That would be the driving motivation.
A pragmatic alliance to stop labor.
From a pragmatic standpoint, yes. Both parties share that common desire to see Labour out of government. And Reform UK draws many of its voters from disaffected Conservative supporters, so there's a potential base for cooperation there.
But it wouldn't be easy, would it?
Oh, absolutely not. There's significant internal reluctance, even outright opposition from some traditional Conservative figures. Many in the Conservative Party would find an alliance with Reform UK deeply challenging.
Why is that?
Well, Reform's often disruptive tactics. There are more radical policy positions on things like net zero or human rights, and just the perception that Reform represents a direct challenge to the Conservative Party's very identity and history, it would be uncomfortable.
But power is a strong lure.
Exactly. The overwhelming desire to form a government and block Labour could potentially override these deep-seated objections, forcing an uncomfortable pragmatic alliance. Such a coalition would undoubtedly lead to significant policy compromises and, I imagine, major internal tensions within both parties.
And if a coalition like that proves too difficult or just doesn't have the numbers, what about the alternative? A minority government. That sounds inherently unstable.
It absolutely is. Historical precedents show just how challenging it can be. Governing without a clear majority means a minority government constantly has to negotiate with opposition parties to get any bill through Parliament. Every single vote becomes a battle.
Which means watering down policies.
Often, yes. It involves making significant concessions that can dilute their original policy agenda. Or it can just lead to frustrating legislative stalemates where key reforms simply cannot pass. Things just grind to a halt.
We saw that recently, didn't we?
We did. The 2017-2019 Conservative government under Theresa May, which relied on that confidence and supply deal with the DUP from Northern Ireland, offers a clear example of the difficulties. Constant battles to pass Brexit legislation, very limited room for any new policy initiatives, and eventually it collapsed because it just couldn't command a majority reliably.
So a minority government is perpetually precarious.
Perpetually. Facing the constant threat of votes of no confidence, often leading to short-lived administrations, and an inability to deliver consistent long-term governance, it's an exhausting way to try and run a country.
What's the broader impact of all this fragmentation on actual policymaking, on the machinery of governance? It sounds like it could just grind everything to a halt, or at least slow it right down.
What's truly critical here, I think, is how much this fragmentation could lead to deep political gridlock. With multiple parties holding significant influence, reaching consensus on major policy decisions becomes incredibly challenging.
Like trying to pass a budget.
Imagine trying to get a budget through Parliament when you need to secure votes from several different, sometimes ideologically opposed parties. It often results in a very short-term policy focus. Governments prioritize immediate survival, tactical wins, over robust, long-term strategic plans.
Which means big, long-term problems don't get addressed.
Exactly. Addressing deep-seated issues like the NHS backlogs, social care reform, climate change, these require consistent multi-year policy commitments and significant investment. A fragmented parliament really struggles to implement that kind of sustained vision. It hinders the ability to tackle complex national challenges effectively.
Leading to policy paralysis.
Policy paralysis, and a feeling among the public that government just isn't working for them. The legislative process transforms into this arduous uphill battle for every single piece of reform.
And in such a complex, potentially deadlocked scenario, we occasionally hear about the monarchy's constitutional role. It almost feels like a historical footnote in modern times, but it becomes perhaps unexpectedly relevant in these moments.
It certainly does. While largely symbolic in the day-to-day political machinations, the monarch does have a crucial, albeit limited, constitutional role in navigating the complexities of forming a government in a hung parliament scenario.
What is that role exactly?
Their fundamental duty is to ensure the country has a functioning government. This typically involves inviting the leader most likely to command the confidence of the House of Commons. That is, the person who can gain the support of a majority of MPs to form a government.
Acting as a sort of backstop.
The monarch acts on advice, of course, but plays this vital nonpartisan role as an ultimate guarantor of constitutional continuity. It's a delicate, largely unwritten convention that highlights the unique constitutional arrangements of the UK. The monarch steps in precisely when the political process itself is deadlocked, providing a vital, stabilizing, albeit largely ceremonial, intervention.
Ultimately, though, what are the broader implications of all this for public trust in the political system itself? This kind of sustained instability, this potential gridlock, it can't be good for the overall health of a democracy, can it?
No, and this raises an important question that extends far beyond the immediate political wrangling in Westminster. Such sustained instability, constant political churn, the perception of ineffective governance. It can significantly erode public trust in political processes and institutions.
How does that erosion manifest itself?
When governments appear unable to govern effectively, or when the system seems perpetually deadlocked, citizens can become deeply disengaged, cynical even. This often translates into lower voter turnout, a feeling that your vote doesn't actually matter, and perhaps an increased search for more extreme or unconventional political solutions outside the traditional spectrum.
Becomes a feedback loop.
It's potentially a dangerous feedback loop. Instability fuels distrust, and distrust can further exacerbate instability. This erosion of trust can undermine the very foundations of democratic participation, making it harder for any government to gain a genuine mandate and create a shared vision for the future. It really highlights the fragility of democratic consensus in a rapidly changing world. Tag economic and international repercussions.
So, beyond the internal political shifts and potential governance challenges, what about the economic and international repercussions of such a fragmented and potentially unstable UK? Because the world watches, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially financial markets.
Oh, absolutely. And what's fascinating here is the direct, almost immediate correlation you see between perceived political stability and economic confidence. Political instability, particularly the kind projected for the UK, uncertainty over who will govern for how long, policy direction can significantly deter foreign investment.
Why is that? What do investors look for?
International investors seek predictability. They want a clear policy environment, a stable regulatory framework. When there's a risk of frequent government changes, policy reversals, or a hung parliament leading to legislative paralysis, capital tends to flow elsewhere, seeking more secure havens.
And the tangible effects.
Well, it can have tangible negative effects on currency markets, leading to a weaker pound sterling as investors sell off UK assets. That makes imports more expensive, which can fuel further inflation. It also leads to a broader dampening of overall economic confidence, impacting everything from consumer spending and business expansion plans right through to the UK's international credit ratings. It signals a country grappling with internal cohesion, which makes it less attractive for long-term strategic investments.
And speaking of economic policies, with Reform UK pushing for significant tax cuts and different spending priorities, what might their stated preferences mean for government spending, taxation, and the national debt under this kind of new landscape?
Well, Reform UK's economic policies, while sometimes, as we said, lacking granular detail on exactly how every spending cut would be achieved,
Right.
they lean towards a very distinct approach. Significantly lower taxes for both individuals and businesses. They argue this will stimulate growth and investment.
But that has implications for spending, surely.
Yeah.
Or debt.
Absolutely. This preference for lower taxes implies either the potential for deep, wide-ranging cuts in government spending across various departments to offset the reduction in revenue, or, alternatively, perhaps a willingness to see the national debt increase further in the short term, though they often frame their policies as debt-reducing in the long run through increased economic activity.
So priorities would shift dramatically.
There would almost certainly be a radical shift in spending priorities, potentially away from areas like net zero initiatives, foreign aid, or what they term wasteful bureaucracy, and perhaps towards more traditional areas like infrastructure, defense, or law enforcement, aligning with their more nationalistic and less interventionist stance. It would involve a significant reprioritization of public funds and could fundamentally reshape the role of the state in the UK economy.
Let's consider trade relations. How might a reform-influenced government impact the UK's relationship with the European Union, for instance? We've seen a degree of maybe stabilization post-Brexit, but could that be disrupted?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, a reform-influenced government would almost certainly push for an even harder line with the European Union. It's central to their ideology.
Harder in what way?
Their core ideology is rooted in a more complete disengagement from perceived EU influence and a more robust assertion of national sovereignty. This could involve challenging existing agreements, like the Windsor Framework that governs trade with Northern Ireland, or even seriously considering withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR.
Why the ECHR?
They view the ECHR and its associated legal interpretations by the courts as a significant impediment to controlling immigration and implementing a much more stringent border policy, particularly regarding deportations.
And the impact of pulling out.
Such moves would inevitably create new tensions with the EU and other European nations. It could profoundly impact existing and future trade deals, potentially creating new, more significant barriers to trade with the UK's closest and largest trading partner. It could lead to a much less cooperative, more confrontational relationship with Brussels, reopening debates many hoped were finally settled after Brexit.
And what about the transatlantic relationship, the special relationship with the U.S.? How might a new UK government navigate relations with a potentially more isolationist United States, especially if we saw a return to an America First type approach?
That raises a really important question about the UK's strategic alliances and its role on the global stage. Navigating relations with a potentially more isolationist U.S., especially one under a renewed America First doctrine, would be challenging for any UK government.
Would a reform-influenced government find common ground?
Possibly. A reform-influenced government with its own nationalistic leanings and skepticism towards multilateral institutions might find some ideological common ground with a more inward-looking U.S. administration, particularly on issues of national sovereignty, skepticism towards international treaties, maybe a more protectionist trade stance.
The potential downsides, too.
Oh, definitely. It could also mean less emphasis on traditional multilateral cooperation through NATO or the UN, for example, and a more transactional approach to alliances. This could force the UK to redefine its global foreign policy and security posture, potentially becoming more self-reliant or seeking new strategic partnerships beyond its conventional allies, as that traditional special relationship might shift significantly in nature.
And thinking broadly at the global economy again, how does the UK's internal stability or instability affect broader European and global supply chains? It's not just a domestic issue, is it?
No, absolutely not. The UK, despite Brexit, remains a crucial hub within broader European and global economic networks. Its internal political and economic stability directly affects the smooth functioning of these intricate global supply chains.
You give an example.
Well, disruptions in the UK's customs procedures due to new trade policies or a volatile currency can have immediate knock-on effects across the entire European continent. Major industries, think automotive manufacturing, aerospace, food production, which rely on these just-in-time supply chains and frictionless movement of components and goods, are particularly vulnerable.
So uncertainty is costly.
Uncertainty or disruption in UK policy, particularly concerning trade tariffs, regulatory alignment, even labor movement, can create bottlenecks, increase costs, and introduce inefficiencies across multiple industries that rely on seamless cross-border movements. A fragile UK government could inadvertently become a source of significant volatility for broader European and global economic flows, impacting businesses and consumers far beyond its borders.
Moving to more specific international ties now, let's turn our attention to Pakistan-UK relations. There are exceptionally deep historical, economic, and diaspora ties between these two countries. How might a political shift like this in the UK directly impact that relationship?
Yes, the direct implications for Pakistan-UK relations are indeed multifaceted and potentially significant, precisely because of those strong existing connections you mentioned.
Where would the impact be felt most keenly?
First and foremost, I think, Reform UK's stringent stance on immigration. Their focus on stopping illegal crossings and implementing a freeze on non-essential immigration could have a profound and direct impact.
So.
This approach could significantly limit future immigration from Pakistan for study, for work, for family reunification, and it could potentially affect the rights or status of the large Pakistani diaspora already living and working in the UK. This is a very sensitive and personal issue for countless families with ties across both nations, directly impacting their ability to live, work, study, and maintain those vital family connections.
And beyond immigration, what about the potential effects on bilateral trade and investment between the two nations? Is that at risk?
Potentially. New UK trade policies, particularly if they become more protectionist or heavily prioritize domestic industries, could affect bilateral trade and investment flows with Pakistan. If internal economic instability makes the UK a less attractive investment destination generally, Pakistani businesses might look elsewhere.
Any potential upsides?
Well, conversely, if reforms pro-deregulation stance creates specific new opportunities, or if the UK actively seeks to forge new trade deals outside the EU framework, there could be avenues for increased trade and investment. But the overall economic uncertainty might well outweigh those potential positives. Key sectors like textiles, IT services, agricultural products, the backbone of Pakistan-UK trade would be watching these developments very closely indeed.
And considering development aid and cooperation, the UK has historically been a significant partner for Pakistan in that area.
Yes, and there's also the potential for shifts there. Shifts in the UK's foreign aid priorities and overall development spending. A reform-influenced government with its strong focus on domestic priorities and fiscal tightening might reevaluate development aid budgets, perhaps change their geographical focus.
Impacting projects on the ground.
It could potentially impact ongoing cooperation initiatives and projects in Pakistan that rely on UK funding or expertise in areas like education, health, climate resilience. Their common sense approach often includes a critical look at how foreign aid is spent and whether it directly aligns with perceived UK national interests.
And of course, that significant Pakistani diaspora in the UK means these political shifts are keenly watched and deeply felt back home in Pakistan, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The Pakistani diaspora in the UK is this vital living bridge between the two nations, culturally, economically, politically. Any changes in UK policy that affect their status, their opportunities, family reunification prospects, or even just their sense of belonging are keenly watched and deeply felt in Pakistan.
So it influences opinion back home.
It certainly can. It can influence public opinion, diplomatic discussions, even investment decisions. Their collective influence isn't just within the UK as a voting bloc or economic force. They are also a crucial conduit for information, sentiment, and remittances back to their country of origin. This makes them a key factor in how these political shifts resonate globally, particularly in Pakistan.
Finally then, thinking about the UK's broader global role. With all this internal focus, potential instability, fragmentation, will the UK be able to maintain its strong voice and influence on critical international issues, things like climate change or its ongoing role in the UN Security Council?
This raises a really critical question about the UK's future international influence and its capacity for global leadership. A government preoccupied with domestic instability, governing with a potentially fragile mandate, and undergoing significant shifts in its economic and foreign policy priorities. Well, it might find its capacity or even its willingness to exert a strong voice on complex international issues significantly diminished.
So a more inward-looking UK.
Potentially, yes. Whether it's leading on climate change initiatives, actively engaging in UN Security Council matters, contributing to international development, or participating robustly in complex diplomatic efforts in challenging regions. A more inward-looking or fragmented UK could see its global leadership role wane.
And that has consequences beyond the UK.
It has implications not just for the UK's prestige, but for global efforts to address collective challenges. A traditional key player might become less able or less willing to contribute. The world arguably needs stable, influential actors, and the UK's internal shifts could certainly challenge its ability to remain one of those key players on the world stage. #tagoutro.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's abundantly clear we're witnessing a truly dramatic, really unprecedented shift in UK politics.
It really is quite something.
From that Labour landslide just a year ago, which carried with it so much hope for many, to the absolutely meteoric rise of Reform UK, the implications are profound and, as we've discussed, multifaceted. We've explored the internal governance challenges, that potential gridlock, the potentially uncertain economic landscape ahead, and the possible redefinition of Britain's international standing.
And it truly is an unfolding story, isn't it? A living case study in the rapid evolution of modern democracy. There's really no clear outcome yet, and the fluidity of the situation just makes it all the more compelling and, frankly, unpredictable.
What stands out for you most?
What stands out most profoundly, I think, is just how quickly public sentiment can pivot. It challenges these long-held assumptions we have about political stability and the enduring nature of traditional party systems. It's a real testament, perhaps, to the power of public discontent when it's left unaddressed for too long.
And that leads us to our final thought for you, our listeners, to consider as you reflect on this truly unprecedented moment. What are your thoughts on this astonishing political moment unfolding in the UK? How do you see it impacting global dynamics, or perhaps even relations with countries like Pakistan going forward, given those deep ties we discussed?
And maybe most importantly, what might this rapid, profound shift teach us all about the true resilience or perhaps the unexpected fragility of democratic stability in our increasingly turbulent world?
Lots to think about there.
It's certainly a moment that asks us all to reflect, I think, on the nature of political representation, the evolving relationship between citizens and their governments, and just the accelerating pace of change in the 21st century political landscape.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the UK's shifting political landscape. We'll be back soon with another vital topic to explore.